Good afternoon. This hearing is now back in session. We will now hear testimony from Dr. Stephen Ross, a former scientific director for OceanGate Incorporated.
Good afternoon, Mr. Ross.
Good afternoon, Dr. Ross. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Dr. Ross, Lieutenant Steele will now administer your oath.
Okay.
Dr. Ross, if you could please stand and raise your right hand for me.
You want me to stand?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yes, I understand. If you'd like to take a step back, just so.
That's going to be difficult where I'm standing.
Okay, no worries. We'll continue on.
How's that?
That's fine, sir.
A false statement given to an agency of the United States is punishable by fine and/or imprisonment under 18 U.S.C. 1001. Knowing this, do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do swear.
Thank you very much. You may be seated.
Dr. Ross, I see that you have counsel present here in the courtroom. Counselor, can you please identify yourself and your firm for the record?
Glad to. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Jason Harris. I'm an attorney with the North Carolina office of Farrell Smith O'Connell. We have the pleasure of representing Dr. Steve Ross.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Ross, thank you for being with us here this afternoon. I'm going to now pass the questioning to Lieutenant Commander Thomas Whalen.
Good afternoon, Mr. Ross, and thank you for being here with us again today. All of my questions are related to your background and experience with OceanGate as a scientific director. We will take a few breaks throughout the proceeding. If you need to take a break, just please let me know, and then we'll pause for that. Before we begin, I'll ask you please refrain from using any acronyms. If you should use an acronym, I'll ask you to stop and please explain what the acronym means.
Okay.
I'm going to start off by asking you a few questions about your background. Dr. Ross, can you please tell us about your background as a research professor, to include your education and field experience?
I've been a marine scientist for over 45 years. My last academic position was as a full research professor at the University of North Carolina. I retired from that position, but I still have an adjunct appointment at the university. I have a bachelor's, a master's, and a PhD degree in zoology, and most of my career has been in coastal, estuarine, and deep sea sciences.
Have you ever been part of manned submersible dives for scientific purposes, other than with OceanGate?
Have I used them? Is that the question?
Sorry, sir. Have you ever been part of manned submersible dives for scientific purposes, other than with OceanGate?
Yes.
Can you please tell me about those experiences?
I started using manned submersibles in 1979. Periodically during my career, when we needed undersea vehicles, I've used 8 different submersibles and a variety of remote operated vehicles, or ROVs.
Of those 8 submersibles that you utilized, were they different operating companies, or was it one company? Can you please go through the history of those, if you remember?
They were different companies. The subs that I used the most were the Johnson Sea Link 1 and 2, operated by Harbor Branch Oceanographic Institute. Other subs came from a variety of different places. NOAA provided one mission, or 2 missions. I used one provided by Greenpeace at one point. Triton, the company that makes Triton submarines, provided one. So there was a mixture, but the two subs I used the most were the Johnson Sea-Link subs.
And were all of these scientific missions completed as part of your official duties supporting research for universities?
Yes.
Does the university have an inspection procedure to verify safety for its members embarking on such missions?
No.
Do you have a process for vetting the submersible vehicle that you are to be operating in?
No, that's taken care of by the companies that we use.
Of the previous 8 submersibles that were utilized in your scientific research, were any of them inspected by the United States Coast Guard?
I wasn't involved in that process, so I don't really know for sure.
Do you know if any of the previous submersibles that you utilized were classed to a classification standard, such as ABS, DNVGL, or Lloyd's?
I was not involved in that process either, but my understanding is that most of them were classed probably by ABS.
When did you begin working with OceanGate?
I first met Stockton Rush and some of his OceanGate team in 2013, but we didn't work together until starting in 2018 when they invited me to be part of a science program and then asked me to be chief scientist in 2021.
And what did you believe were your primary responsibilities as the chief scientist?
I was brought in to help develop a scientific program to broaden the outreach of and the activities that OceanGate was involved in. So my role was to try to develop a viable science program using the Titan submarine.
And who funded your participation? Was it OceanGate?
My time was donated. OceanGate paid for science team travel.
And was it OceanGate Inc. who paid for the science team travel or another associated organization?
My understanding was that the OceanGate Foundation supported the science team.
Were you operating in support of your official duties with regards to the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, or independently?
No.
So you were operating independently?
Yes.
Can you talk to me a little bit more about the scientific program that you were going to be leading for OceanGate from 2021?
Basically, what I was doing for OceanGate was the same model I had used in other projects to develop a program to explore unusual or unique habitats in the deep sea, to look at the composition of the biology, the composition of the habitats used. And we developed a program. I invited a scientific team to help with this activity. And we proceeded to evolve a program with OceanGate.
Was the work that you were doing on the expedition part of a larger research project, or was it specific to this expedition?
It was related to some of my other programs, but it was independent.
Was the University of North Carolina, Wilmington a partner with OceanGate in this expedition?
No.
Were you compensated in any way for your role as the chief scientist?
No.
Did you ever have a discussion with Mr. Rush regarding his expectation of you as the chief scientist?
Yes.
Could you tell me what you believed your expectation was as the chief scientist?
basically, as I already stated, was to develop a science program with OceanGate. And it was left to me as to how that would proceed, although Stockton and I had several conversations about what I needed to do that.
On your expeditions, were there any other scientists aboard, and did they have their own agenda, or was it a collective research purpose?
There were other scientists that were part of the team, and they were operating under the umbrella that we were developing as a unified program. They were collaborators.
Prior to the Titanic expeditions in 2021, were you part of any other dives with OceanGate?
No.
As compared to other submersible dive and operations, the previous 8 that you had conducted, how would you compare the level of scientific interest between those and OceanGate with regards to the Titanic expeditions in 2021, 2022, and 2023?
If I understand the question correctly, in previous programs, science was the only focus. The OceanGate expeditions had multiple agendas.
What other agendas do you believe the OceanGate expeditions had?
The mission specialist had a variety of interest and needs, and OceanGate tried to accommodate those. One example being viewing the Titanic shipwreck.
How much actual interest into your scientific program did mission specialists have in conducting the science and research?
Objection.
I didn't have conversations with all of the mission specialists, and I was not
Dr.
on
Ross, hold on for a
every.
second, please.
I'm sorry, Dr. Ross. Yes, sir, you objected to the question?
I don't know that I need to be heard any further than just a remark. If the questionnaire is going to ask Dr. Ross about the information supposedly known by others, I think that this witness is not going to have that information. That's all.
Okay, understand, sir, but in this proceeding for administration, we can ask questions of what a witness has heard from others if they're willing to, answer that.
Sure, I agree. He can, if he knows the answer.
Okay.
Right? I'm not sure that was what the question is.
Okay.
He's free to answer if he knows.
Yes, sir. So, Dr. Ross, just the conversation is, for administrative hearing, if you recall, hearsay, you can provide that to the board. But if you're not comfortable or didn't hear the conversation, please just make that clear.
I can rephrase.
Okay, please.
Thank you.
Dr. Ross, what do you believe was the primary mission of OceanGate expeditions in 2021, 2022, and 2023?
To visit and view the Titanic shipwreck.
What did you believe, or how would you describe what a mission specialist is to me?
A mission specialist, as I understood it, is a person who paid for a berth on the ship to visit the Titanic and be involved in other parts of the operation if possible.
Recorder, I'm going to ask you to please bring up Exhibit 008 and scroll to page 9. And Dr. Ross, please let me know when you're able to see what the exhibit on the screen.
I'll have to sit closer.
Is it page 9?
Page 9, please. And sir, this is from Titanic Expedition 2022, and it is the science and dive plan that was part of the submission from OceanGate to NOAA for a Section 113 approval authorization. Did you have any part in creating this document and this science plan?
Well, all I see is one page, and it looks like the first page of the science plan that I wrote for OceanGate. Yes. I think my name is on it. Should be.
It's redacted for purposes, sir.
Ah.
And for Expedition 2022, were you able to actually gather the data that was for purpose in this science plan?
We gathered sufficient data to write a scientific paper.
And was that paper released?
It's in development still.
You can take that down, reporter. Were you made aware that the Titan submersible that was being used for the 21, 22, and 23 expeditions was not inspected by United States Coast Guard?
Yes, I think so.
Were you aware that the Titan submersible was not built to a classification standard?
I'm not aware of those engineering details.
While on board these expeditions, did you provide any training sessions or presentations to the crew and the mission specialists during the expedition?
Occasionally only related to the science.
Based upon the dive log or the logs that were provided from OceanGate, you took part in 3 dives, 2 of which were in 2022 and 1 which was in 2023. Is this correct?
Correct. Yes.
You did not partake in any dives in 2021. Was there a specific reason for that?
I was supposed to join the mission, and I still fulfilled the role of chief scientist, but I had a back injury and could not attend that cruise.
Can you please describe, and in the final, or in the transcripts that were posted earlier for the dive 88, there was a mention of a Niskin bottle. Can you please tell us what a Niskin bottle is and how that is utilized?
A Niskin bottle is a very simple mechanical device used to collect water samples. It's basically a PVC tube with 2 end caps. The end caps are held open by an elastic mechanism. When you get to the location or the depth where you want to take a sample, you can trigger those end caps to close and they capture a water sample.
Dr. Ross, in Expedition 2022, were you there for the entirety of the expedition, all 5 missions?
No, I only attended mission 4 and 5.
Were you on board for dive 80? Do you know offhand?
Yes.
On dive 80, according to the remarks section of the dive log, there was a loud bang heard after surfacing. Would you like me to reference it?
Could I just clarify, when you say on board, do you mean on board the submersible or on board of the vessel?
I'll clarify. Were you,
I was on board the vessel.
so you were on
Ship.
board the vessel. By vessel, I mean Horizon Arctic at the time of the dive of dive 80 on the Titan. Of the
Yes.
Titan. Okay. So on dive 80, according to the remarks section of the dive log, there was a loud bang heard upon surfacing. While you were on board the vessel, Horizon Arctic, were you made aware of this remark and or this instance where there was a loud bang?
Yes.
And what was discussed? Was anything discussed specifically with you, or was it discussed amongst the crew? Can you please tell me about that?
There was wide discussion about the noise amongst all of the crew, mission specialist, OceanGate, science crew. Everyone was interested in what that noise might have been.
And was there a determination on what that noise may have been?
I was told there was a theory about what it could have been.
And do you remember what that theory was? And if so, can you please share?
I can't recall that in great detail. I was told that there was likely a shifting of the pressure hull in its steel or metal cradle that when it popped back into place could have made that loud noise.
And in the inspection after dive 80, did you witness OceanGate personnel inspecting the hull after dive 80?
I have no knowledge of that.
At any point, did you witness them pull the hull insert out to gain access to do a visual inspection of the interior of the hull?
I did not witness that.
You were listed as a crew member on dive 81.
Correct.
Can you confirm? That was one dive after the one where they heard the loud bang. What were your thoughts about their determination on what the loud noise was on dive 80 if you were diving in a subsequent dive? Did you have any concerns?
Yes, I was concerned and asked their chief engineer, Phil Brooks, if he was concerned.
And what did he tell you?
He said that this noise was a concern and that the OceanGate team was focused on trying to determine the source of the noise and that would influence whether we made future dives.
Did they ever provide you any specific analysis of the real-time monitoring system?
No.
So I'd like to shift to dive 81. Can you tell me a little bit more about that dive?
Could you be a bit more specific?
Yes, sir. So dive 81, according to the log, you reached 3,840 meters, which was the depth at which the Titanic wreck site sat. Were you able to visually see the Titanic wreck?
Yes.
And prior to getting to the depth of 3,840 meters, can you talk to me about the drop weights? And as you were descending through the water column, do you remember approximately at what depth you would have dropped the drop weights?
No, we dropped 2 roll weights, but I do not remember the depth.
Can you tell me a little bit more about dive 81? And you said you were able to actually witness and see the Titanic. Were you able to conduct any scientific research while on that dive?
Yes, we collected 2 water samples with the Niskin bottles. We had a CTD instrument on every dive, and on that dive we recorded salinity and temperature of the water, and we made video observations with the cameras. External and internal cameras.
Sir, can you please tell me what CTD means?
I'm sorry, conductivity, temperature, depth. And from conductivity and temperature, you can calculate salinity.
Thank you, sir. Were you aware of any issues or instances of malfunctioning of the thrusters while on board this dive?
Yes.
Can you please tell me about that?
When we reached the bottom, the pilot, Scott Griffith, determined that one of the main thrusters was reversed. The controls were reversed. That was the main issue with when we were on the bottom.
And so how did the pilot overcome this, the reversing of the thruster controls?
There was some conversation with the surface. They determined that they couldn't really change that problem or the issue. There was discussion of whether to terminate the dive, but in the end, to his credit, Scott Griffith retrained himself to operate the thrusters normally. Basically, retrained his thinking. And we proceeded with the dive.
Sir, also while on this dive, while in the sub, were you also aware that other things were happening within the sub, such as the port drop weights wouldn't drop? This is according to the maintenance log. There was flashing lights, the port battery dropped, the sonar dropped, 4K dropped, 2KH was stuck, and then there was a 419 after touchdown due to the controller drop. Were you aware?
asking me
Sir, I was going to say that was a long string
Yeah,
of.
thank you.
I apologize. And I could summarize.
Well, also the code numbers, Commander Whalen.
Sure.
Dr. Ross, does any of that sound familiar to you, sir?
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Were you aware of these other incidences that were happening while on board the dive?
Most of the ones you listed, yes.
And being that you were part of Expedition 21, 22, and 23, was this a common occurrence or throughout your experience that there was multiple mechanical or material failures while on dives?
I don't have knowledge of every dive.
Okay.
I didn't have access to the submersible logs that were kept by OceanGate.
Understood, sir. After Expedition 2022, did you conduct a debrief or an exit interview for the expedition?
With
OceanGate
whom?
or Mr. Rush?
I wouldn't call it an exit interview. We continued to have conversations before, during, and after the expeditions.
At what point did you decide to return for Expedition 2023?
It almost right away. I never determined that I would not be part of it.
When did you become aware of the new support vessel, the Polar Prince, and the new transportation operation of the submersible?
I don't recall exactly when that was.
For Expedition 2023, when did you come aboard the expedition? Which mission?
Mission 4.
Prior to your arrival, were you made aware of any instances that occurred prior to your arrival with regards to the towing of the submersible?
Yes.
Can you tell me about what you were briefed upon?
Before I boarded the vessel, at our hotel, I was told that the submersible snagged an obstruction while being towed at night. The obstruction was assumed to be abandoned fishing gear, but that was never, it was not conclusive. That caused some excitement.
Were you made aware of any damage that was caused from that incident?
I am not.
Had you ever been part of a submersible operation in which the submersible was towed atop a platform for an extended distance?
No.
So in Expedition 2023, you were part of Dive 87. Is this correct?
Correct.
Can you tell me about Dive 87? What was the plan for Dive 87?
We could not dive at the Titanic site due to weather issues, so we moved. We were northwest on the continental slope, and we had a target depth for a dive to 2,000 meters.
Recorder, I'm going to ask you to please bring up exhibit number 53, which was the NOAA weather report for the Polar Prince Expedition 2023. With regards to the towing and launch operations, did this cause you any concern?
Can you be more specific?
Being that this was an operation that you had never been taken part of with regards to the towing of the submersible and the launch and recovery platform, did this add any extra or any extra risks in the operation?
Probably so. That's a bit out of my area of expertise, but the towing was awkward.
While it may be out of your expertise with this regard, but as a person who had boarded the submersible, did you feel safe in that operation to get on board the platform while it was at a towing distance and get on board the submersible?
I felt safe. I've done small boat operations quite a lot. It certainly is. It adds a level of complication compared to getting in the sub on a large ship. So that's obvious. But it was not outside the realm of doability, for lack of a better word.
Sir, can you see the exhibit on your screen?
I can.
And in the top left image is a image as to where the Polar Prince had gone this was for dive 87. And you stated that you went to which would have been the northwest of the Titanic wreck site to get out of the weather. Is this correct?
Yes. Our target dive was the Gully Canyon off Nova Scotia, and it turns out we could not dive there.
Okay. So you weren't able to dive there. What was the alternative plan then?
It's simply to dive on a spot on the open slope to be able to have a dive.
Okay. And what were the weather conditions that you remember on that day?
It was cool and breezy, clear. I estimated seas to be 4 to 5 feet.
And that dive, can you tell me about how the dive went, and was there any issues or problems that happened while conducting the dive?
Yes, the dive was aborted.
And why was the dive aborted?
The sub submerged on its platform to 30 feet, and it was determined the pilot indicated to the passengers that there was a problem with the variable ballast tank valve. And we came back to the surface to try to fix that. There was a malfunction in the platform, and that took considerable time to correct, and the dive was thus aborted.
And can you elaborate on what conditions that you experienced in the Titan sub while you were ascending up on the platform? When you said there was a malfunction of the valve?
Could you repeat that, please?
Just so I can have a clear picture of what you experienced, sir. So as you were ascending from the 10-meter platform, as you were coming up to the surface, there was a malfunction with the platform. Can you explain a little bit more of what the orientation then was of the platform?
After we reached the surface, the platform had a valve malfunction, and the bow of the platform submerged, tilting the platform and the submersible to about a 45-degree angle.
So just so I'm understanding, so the orientation, which the bow of the platform was the aft of the Titan submersible.
Correct. The bow of the submersible was pointing up in the air.
And how many persons were on board this dive?
5.
And can you tell me a little bit more about what you experienced once that happened?
There's nothing to hold on to inside the submersible, really. So it's a fairly smooth tube. The pilot crashed into the rear bulkhead. The rest of the passengers tumbled about. I ended up standing on the rear bulkhead. One passenger was hanging upside down, and the other 2 managed to wedge themselves into the bow end cap.
Was anybody injured during this?
What?
Was anybody injured?
No.
And were the seas calm while this was happening?
No, they were not.
And how would you, now at this point, how would you describe what you experienced while in that condition?
Well, as I said, it was uncomfortable and unpleasant, and it took considerable time to correct the problem. There were multiple issues that the surface team was having to deal with.
You said it took considerable time. Approximately how long were you in this position for?
I'm not sure. I would guess at least an hour.
And was the Titan submersible solidly affixed to the platform? Or was there movement?
Not.
It was not. Can you please explain?
The bow of the submersible skids became detached from the platform from what we understood, and thus was partly decoupled.
And how did that feel being in that position?
That was more uncomfortable.
Obviously, you weren't able to see outside of the submersible to the platform, but did it feel as if it was slamming against the platform?
That was my understanding, yes.
And so after the approximate hour, they were able to correct the deficiency and allow you to ascend to the surface?
We were already on the surface. They corrected the tilt of the platform so that we could reestablish the sub on the platform and remove the passengers.
Who was the pilot for this dive?
Stockton Rush.
And did he make any comments to you, or did you have a conversation regarding this?
Well, yes, he was upset that this had happened.
And so once they had reoriented the platform and you were able to depart, did you have any conversations after this or do a post-dive safety incident summary or anything like that?
I do not recall that.
Did they ever, after this incident, did they conduct a post-dive inspection of the hull?
I'm not aware of whether they did or did not.
When did you depart the expedition?
A couple of days after Dive 87, we steamed to port to change crews, and I left the vessel.
Were you scheduled to be there for mission 4 and 5?
Only 4, not 5.
That's all the questions I have, sir.
Dr. Ross, are you okay to continue, or would you like to take a break at this time?
I'm okay to continue if you want.
Okay, thank you, sir. Mr. Fawcett will now have questions for you.
Good afternoon, Dr. Ross. My name is Keith Fawcett. I'm a Coast Guard Marine Casualty Investigator.
Okay.
I want to revisit Dive 81, where Lieutenant Commander Whalen discussed issues with the controller for the thrusters and flickering lights and other equipment issues. Would you consider, based on your experience as a submersible pilot, the controller to be a critical component of the submersible?
My apologies. I don't believe Dr. Ross is a submersible pilot. That was part of the question.
Can you clarify that point, Dr. Ross?
I'm sorry, which
can-
point is he?
I can
sorry.
clarify.
Wait, just, Dr. Ross, can you clarify on whether you were a submersible pilot?
Is this for Dive 81 or in general?
For
I was
General.
trained.
Dr. Ross, hold on, let's
let me just
be sure
clarify.
we get the questions straight.
Okay. First off, were you a pilot for OceanGate, Dr. Ross?
No.
Okay.
No.
Have you been a submersible pilot for any other submersible?
Yes.
So, Mr. Fawcett, can you rephrase the question and say your prior experience as a submersible pilot?
Yes, sir. And my question was, in your prior experience as a submersible pilot, would you consider the thruster controller a critical component for a submersible?
In my opinion, yes.
And just to be clear, were you the submersible pilot of Deep Worker 2000?
Yes.
Thank you. I want to talk about normalization of risk. So based on your experience within submersibles, would you say that retraining the operator, the submersible pilot, while submerged, to operate those controls was an acceptable risk?
I think it was.
And you mentioned the submersible, you used the word passengers were aboard. With passengers aboard, would you still call that an acceptable risk?
Yes.
Why didn't, were there any discussions that took place within the Titan about surfacing with the problems that were being experienced, including the malfunctioning controller for the thrusters and flickering lights?
That was an option.
But was it discussed?
It was mentioned as an option.
Were those problems communicated from the Titan to the support ship on the surface during the
Yes.
dive?
You're talking about the thruster control issue?
And the flickering lights?
I don't recall about the flickering lights, whether there was a conversation about that with the surface, but there was concerning the thrusters.
So I want to shift gear a little bit. You were on the Polar Prince during the 2023 Titan expedition. Do you know if the Polar Prince or the support vessels were equipped with devices that could hear underwater acoustic sounds such as aquatic life or other sounds from the ocean?
You're asking if the ship was equipped with those?
Or the support vessels?
They had hydrophones in order to communicate with the submarine using a text system.
And where were you on the accident day, the 18th of June, 2023?
I was in Newfoundland.
On that day, did anyone communicate with you that they had heard the sound of an implosion or a similar sound on the vessel's acoustic monitoring devices, such as a hydrophone or other device?
No.
So would it be fair to say that an oceanographic research vessel is a vessel that engages in oceanographic or limnologic research?
Yes.
And then do you know the maximum operating depth that one of the oceanographic research vessels can go when they're taking scientific personnel below the surface?
I'm not aware of such a limit. I'm not sure I understand the question.
Yeah, is there a maximum depth where an oceanographic research vessel may go if they're conducting subsurface dives?
Not that I'm aware of.
Objection to the form of the question. I don't understand if he's talking about a regulatory objection or he's talking about a physical capability objection.
Okay, Mr. Fawcett, can you clarify, are you talking about some kind of regulatory?
Yes, a regulatory requirement not to exceed a certain depth.
Thank you.
I'm not aware of that.
So Lieutenant Steele, if you'll pull up Coast Guard Exhibit 072, this is a Coast Guard note that the Coast Guard sends to the inspection personnel that conduct inspection and oversight of vessels of the United States. And I'm going to read it. It just makes it easier. The Coast Guard is required to follow the laws and regulations of the United States. On page 2, on the bottom paragraph, it discusses Section 515 of the just released Coast Guard Authorization Act of 2018, and there is a redacted word there. And it provides a clarification of the term scientific personnel as it pertains to oceanographic research vessels. From this point on, age is not a factor in determining whether a person can be considered a member of the scientific personnel aboard. If the scientific personnel are receiving instruction in oceanography or limnology, the study of lakes, they could technically be in kindergarten, and it is now okay. The legal change contradicts a long-standing Coast Guard policy regarding scientific personnel, which basically limited the term to graduates and undergraduates at college level, consistent with the original discussion in the Oceanographic Research Act of the 1960s. Are you aware of that regulation and that regulation with regard to oceanographic research vessels?
Just, Mr. Fawcett, I want to clarify for the record, that is a statute.
Statute. Thank you, sir. Are you aware of that, sir?
I have not seen this document.
Thank you, sir. That's all I have.
And Mr. Fawcett, just to clarify also, this was a Coast Guard interpretation of a statutory change. And so I guess a question would be, were you aware of the statutory change that removed age limitations for scientific personnel, Dr. Ross?
No.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Fawcett, do you have any additional questions?
I do not, Captain. Thank you.
Dr. Ross, I just have a couple follow-up questions, but I would like to ask, would you like to take a 10-minute break at this time?
I'm okay.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. I would just ask we take maybe 5 minutes, if that's okay.
Okay, yes, sir.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Okay, the hearing will recess and reconvene at 2:05. This hearing is now back in session. Dr. Ross, can you still hear us?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Sir, at this time, I'm going to pass the questioning to the National Transportation Safety Board. Mr. Muse.
Good afternoon, Dr. Ross. I just have one clarification. When you said you could not dive at Gully Canyon and had to go somewhere else on the shelf, I think that was dive 87. What was the reasoning for not being able to dive at Gully Canyon?
The Gully Canyon's a protected area, and it turns out we would have needed a permit to dive there. So we were told not to dive there.
Do you remember who told you that?
Not exactly, no.
Okay, thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Mr. Muse. Sir, now I just have a couple follow-ups from came up throughout your testimony. I'm curious, sir, in your opinion, is viewing the Titanic wreck site equivalent to conducting scientific operations?
Anytime I go underwater in the deep sea and view anything, it has scientific value.
And sir, are you familiar with the scientific operations definition in the United States Code?
In what code?
In U.S. or under statutory law?
No. No.
Sir, during the Titan dives you participated on, did the Titan ever lose communications with the surface vessel, the text communications?
Not that I'm aware of.
Sir, while you were on expeditions, including on the support vessel, did anyone voice concerns to you about the condition of the hull beyond the loud noise?
No, not that I recall.
Sir, for your initial engagement with OceanGate, was that initiated by you, or did OceanGate reach out to you?
I had colleagues that I had worked with in a previous project suggested to OceanGate that I should be involved, and OceanGate reached out to me, and we had several conversations after that.
Did OceanGate ever explain to you why scientific operations were important to them?
Well, I was the scientific operations, so I didn't need that explanation.
Thank you, sir. At this time, I'd like to pass the questioning to OceanGate Counsel.
No questions on our end, thank you.
Okay, Dr. Ross, I believe a follow-up question from Commander Whalen.
Okay.
Dr. Ross, did you and Mr. Rush ever have a discussion regarding the hull and how long the hull would last?
What do you mean by how long the hull would last?
How many cycles the hull could dive to, or how many dives the hull would be sufficient to dive to?
Yes.
And what was that conversation?
I asked Stockton for my own curiosity how many cycles he thought the Titan would be good for before it needed refurbishment.
And what was his answer?
Indefinite.
Thank you, Dr. Ross. That's all the questions I have.
Dr. Ross, are you aware of any maintenance that was conducted on the Titan's hull after dive 87?
I am not aware of any, no.
Are there any further questions from the board or OceanGate for Dr. Ross? Dr. Ross, is there anything that we haven't asked you that you think would be valuable for this investigation?
Not that comes to mind right away, no.
Would you like to, before we close, make a statement to the board, sir?
I appreciate the opportunity, but I'd rather not at this time.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Ross, you are now released as a witness at this formal hearing. Thank you for your testimony and cooperation. If I later determine that this board needs additional information from you, I will contact you through your counsel. If you have any questions about this investigation, you may contact the investigation recorder, Lieutenant Kelly Steele. Thank you, sir, and have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
This hearing is now adjourned for the day and will reconvene at 8:30 a.m. tomorrow morning. Thank you.